David, my friend, how are we today?
I am doing well, thank you. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, this week been focusing a good bit with some businesses that are lucky to be at the point where they're considering exit strategies.
Hmm.
And so really have been working not only with them, but even with our other clients that are earlier in the process about this concept of building a sellable business. First off is, do they want to build a sellable business? Sometimes people can't see past this business. They're like, I'm just building it. I don't want, but at some point, having been there, you yourself, there's going to be a
Hmm.
point where it's like, maybe I want to do other things. And so, as a business that's viable and sellable, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is to make it sellable. Granted, we're putting all this energy into building businesses. These owners are sticking their neck out, taking the risk, and working long, long hours to build something with the intent of selling it and cashing out, usually. But unfortunately, there's a big misunderstanding or of what the business is really worth and how it's valued. Um, there's a big difference in what it's worth to somebody else, to a buyer, than what it's worth to the current owner. And sometimes that's tough news to receive when we do evaluation. But at the end of the day, it's about having a business that can really run without you. The business should provide for your lifestyle this year, next year, and whatnot. But you and I both know some folks that have kind of suffered some either life changing events, either a death or an illness, and there's a need to promptly sell the business. So for your loved one's sake, if something were to happen to you, the owner, then certainly the business should be set up to where it is marketable and sellable, or could be transitioned over to the employees without to our manager, a new owner, without really suffering a big hit in the operations. So it takes a lot of work to build it up to that point, but starts with having some understanding of what creates value or what creates a sustainable business that can operate without you.
Okay. And you talked about the valuation tool. I know we subscribed to kind of one of the leading toolkits to support
Right.
that, but the content of that valuation, as you mentioned, it's more than just top line income, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you look at it, if you're to take a look at it from the perspective of an investor, if you were going to buy a business,
Okay.
you want it to provide a return on investment, right? So if you're evaluating a property, a home, a business, stocks, whatever, you're going to look at the risk factor. So, number one, what is it returning from a cash standpoint? But also, what's the risk associated with it? So, kind of going back to my previous comment, if the business is so reliant on the owner, then when it sells, the owner is withdrawn. And boy, there's a lot of risk. How many customers are going to stay with us? How many vendors are going to stay? Do we get to continue on as it was before? And I know in my world, my dad had a pharmacy, and when he sold to CVS, they paid him for the inventory and for the prescriptions basically in the file cabinet back then, but really didn't give him much for the business because he did the ordering. He cleaned the store most of the time. He came in and filled all the prescriptions. The whole thing centered around him. He had all the customer relationships. And so when dad was gone, like it's just another pharmacy. And so
Hmm.
it was worth a lot less. So that's what we're trying to do is eliminate risk by diversifying the customer base, diversifying the supply chain to where it's pretty much bulletproof. And the more recurring revenue, especially in this world today, like the more recurring revenue or memberships and subscriptions and things like that, boy, that just takes the value of the business to a whole nother level.
Yes, for sure. And businesses, just fact, are built on gross profit. Agreed.
Right, right.
And
So,
so as we think about that gross profit, that's basically what's left after you make a sale and then you deliver it. Basically what do you have left? And this is kind of this keep your house in order type thing that a well-run business, a well-oiled machine, which is what the Action Coach system install accomplishes, is a well-run
yeah.
business. And it makes me think about a home sale. Everybody either has a home, rents a home, lives underneath a roof. And so when you go to sell that home, you have this time in the home and there's been maintenance or the lack thereof. There's been
Hmm.
upkeep or the lack thereof. there's curb appeal or there's the lack thereof. And so just because it's the home you raised your kids in and you love dearly doesn't make it worth what it's worth sentimentally to the owner. And when that home is put up for sale, there's going to be a market analysis to say what are the common types of homes. So when we do evaluation, we look at the industry code so that it's objective and it's spread, it's not myopic to that individual. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the industry analysis. But then most likely that buyer is also going to have an inspector come in. And so there's going to be the business valuation, which is, the top level, just what are these things, what are the homes comparable size location worth? But then that inspector is going to go in and say, what's the other stuff that you can't see from a satellite or from the curb? And they're going to be crawling around in that house and looking in the walls, on the walls, behind the walls, under the floors,
Yep.
in the attic access. And so similarly, business owners that are looking to build a sellable businesses, it needs to be a well-maintained, well-oiled, well-running machine. That's what investors are looking for. They don't want to have to come in and be the hero. They don't want to have to come in and rebuild. They don't want to have to come in and relearn everything. And so similarly, like with a home upkeep, doing those things yearly prevents that big surprise, hopefully, at the tail
Yeah.
end. And so
Absolutely.
certainly some similarities there that one might can apply that don't have all the knowledge of building and having a sellable business, but like you, personal story of having sold a business, they're looking for one that they can come in and say, it's pretty much turnkey. This
Yeah.
is a well-oiled machine. And interestingly enough, freedom for a business owner is achieved at the point that they have the well-oiled machine. So when they are out and about working on the business, they're not constantly getting drugged back into the business because of disrepair
Yeah.
or poor team, all these types of things. Does that generate any thoughts for you here as we bring this one home?
Yeah, and in some cases, the businesses that are going up for sale, somebody's actually a buyer would actually be buying a job. And that's not that appealing. The business is much more marketable when it's an investment, and it can be run either rolled into an existing business and kind of combined, or be taken over by an investor that does not want to show up and put in the 50, 60, 70 hours a week, into that business. So the nice thing about the platform that we use is it does offer up some of those metrics as to how, for within the industry, how does a particular business compare. But it also breaks it down into 8 different metrics to compare individually across each of those eight metrics that contribute to the valuation. How does this particular business compare with others in the industry? So if a plumber's interested, man, how do I compare with other plumbers? Like, this is a great way to do it for an aggregate score as well as each of those 8 drivers. And may be obvious, but gee, if I'm going to increase my personal income this year and increase the value of my business, that report will show exactly where you ought to put a little bit more energy to improve things, and can help project, boy, if I get this in order and this in order, now the business is worth much more. And one final thought is, the smaller the business, the lower the multiple. It's all based on a multiple of the seller's discretionary income. So the bigger the business, generally the lower the risk, and so the higher the multiple. So that's why we want to continue to grow revenue. And not only is it generally going to increase the owner's income, but it will also increase the value of that asset if and when an individual wants to sell.
Yeah,
It just makes sense to know what the business is worth.
it does. And as strategic advisors and growth strategists, our focus is leveraging the information within the business. If we identify there's a gap in some data that's available to have good metrics and key performance indicators, or KPIs, as some may have heard them referred to, is not just to say snapshot in time, but we, David, you and I, really leverage that to look forward. And so as part of our coaching programs, we certainly can support business owners and leaders with getting a current valuation and look toward building a business that's worth what that individual needs it to be worth. Case in point, when we embark on that solo or entrepreneurial journey, many of us are redirecting, maybe with by way of a W-2 income that has some
Mm-hmm.
401k and some employer sponsored benefits. As you embark on that journey, many times those funds get redirected. Okay. And so while you may be able to replicate your income of a W-2 by way of being a business owner, if you're not continuing to fund your retirement, so to speak, make sure that you view your business as that asset. And so just because
Right.
we're able to replicate our income prior to being self-employed, the sellable business piece is the part to say, what do I need? Because we can make the business worth what we need it to be worth based on taking
Hmm.
specific steps and leveraging specific strategies that drive a business's valuation. So that's the only point I think I'd leave with here for the listeners, is to say, don't just look at how much you're making a year, but really have the end in mind at the start of your journey to say, I need this business to be sellable at whatever, $3 million. And
That's right.
we, David and I, are happy to help have a conversation, no obligation, with respect to what that might look like for you. So reach out if those are the things that are top of mind for you.
Super. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, David. Talk soon.
All right.